over to Jonathan for our first talk. This is on Terraform Monorepo versus Multi-repo. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks for that. So as Isaac and Martin previously said, my name is Jonathan, and I'm the DevOps Engineer for the platform team at FOOTASYLUM. I've come to talk to you today about Terraform, in particular Monorepo versus Multi-repo, but especially in particular part of the journey that we're currently on at FOOTASYLUM as we move away from a Monorepo and start to explore the possibilities in a Multi-repo pattern. So just click through this. So briefly going to talk about what Terraform is, then talk about the history of Terraform at FOOTASYLUM before taking a little bit of a further dive into Monorepo, Multi-repo, and where I think the ideas for the future of Terraform will be for FOOTASYLUM. So what is Terraform? It's an open source tool for creating and maintaining infrastructure. It's written in the HashiCorp configuration language. That's because it's created by HashiCorp. And it relies on the concept of providers to extend the main tool to talk to different cloud vendors or infrastructure vendors. So some of those you will be familiar with, Azure, AWS, things like that. But it also does things like Datadog and PagerDuty. So you write the files, you run the tool with a couple of commands, the main ones being plan and apply. It'll read through those files and it goes away and creates the infrastructure as you've told it to. So the history of FOOTASYLUM's use of Terraform. It was introduced by the platform team. It was actually introduced into the platform team by a third party when we started to build more services into Azure. And at the time, it was a Monorepo that was looking after a small number of services. Part of the learning journey that we've taken is how we manage the files that we were putting in the Monorepo and how we would build them into the environments. So we've we've hung on to some of the aspects of the way we used to build and deploy, but we're starting to change that. So when it was just a small number of services, we were quite comfortable with running it. We'd actually had the auto apply feature enabled in the pipelines. And then we fast found out that that could cause issues. Say if someone had changed things in the Azure portal, that would result in unwanted changes happening when Terraform ran. So we could potentially overwrite or undo things, or Terraform would get blocked. So we then moved on to the idea of using modules as a way to separate out the concerns as we start to develop more services, which improved things a little bit, but then platforms started to become a gatekeeper with the process. Lots of PRs from other teams and other product teams to try and get their small changes into the infrastructure and into Azure, which often resulted in us becoming a bit of a blocker for those teams, or potentially stopping those teams from getting that work done as fast as they would need to. So I was then approached by a newly formed product team looking after our headless commerce product. And they asked me for my advice or my opinion on how they might be able to utilize Terraform to get their infrastructure into Azure. And at that same time, I'd realized that we could run separate Terraform instances using different files and different state files. And that would build those resources in Azure without actually talking to any of the other resources that we'd already deployed into Azure. So I was confident that they could go away, develop their own Terraform strategy, develop their own files and their own ways of deploying the code and getting the infrastructure built. And it's part of the journey that we're on now, is that we're taking the learnings and the outcomes of that experience and sharing that out into the other product teams and empowering them to take ownership and responsibility for their infrastructure. So a Monorepo, as I alluded to earlier, this was a single repository, and it still is a single repository from platform's perspective, with a little screenshot here of some of the services that we have created. It's a single repository that builds the infrastructure into multiple different resource groups in Azure. The pros of a Monorepo are that you've got a single source of truth and that it's easier to assert quality control. So as people are adding to the infrastructure and to the estate, there is a single source of truth that they can go and find ideas, or they can go and learn from the way that other people have done it. And that helps to align the strategy and the things that we have agreed upon. But the cons of that are that you can, or we can, as platform, have experienced blocking other teams. We prevent their work from getting out into live, into production, which can cause some headaches. And as we start to add more and more to this mono repository in the way that Terraform works, it does increase that build and release life cycle. So there is a longer wait time in getting that work into production or into the environment. So the multi-repo strategy, sort of where we're sort of exploring at the moment, multiple independent repositories that contain the infrastructure targeting a particular service or product. So the pros are that this empowers the teams to achieve their goals. They are free to make their own design choices and their own mistakes to a degree. It removes that inter-team dependency, so there's no team blocking that work from being released, and ultimately that leads to faster build times. The cons being that as the expertise spreads out between the different teams, that shared knowledge, that shared agreement on principles and designs, that might get missed. So that's one of the issues that we can see. And obviously it becomes harder to link more and more dependencies between infrastructure if that's something that you're thinking about doing. So the final step, I think, for FOOTASYLUM, and certainly where I would like to take it, would be into a shared mono-repo of modules, a sort of open source infrastructure library. We would build an approved set of modules that everybody can contribute to, but ultimately everybody gets a baseline state of the infrastructure that they're going to deploy into Azure. And from that, there would be multi-repos where these modules are consumed. This would help to standardize some of the approach, remove some of the cognitive load, such as the security issues, or maybe even certain aspects about the way that you want to scale up that infrastructure that you're providing. And I'm hoping that this would help to improve and better align the infrastructure overall. That's my talk. So I'm happy and free to take any questions that might come out of that.
Cheers, Jonny. We've had a few come through on Slido, actually. Let me load it up. Okay, so the top voted one is, can you recommend where to start for an infrastructure as code newbie?
Start small would be my advice. There's lots of examples. There's lots of initiatives out there. So one I can think of off the top of my head is there's A Cloud Guru have got a challenge out. It's about to end this month. It was about putting your CV into static storage or a website configured from static storage in Azure. That's relatively simple to get going with the Terraform stuff. And I'm certainly happy to share out resources and links to some of those things to get that person going. So happy to connect over that one. But start small. Start with something that you know that you've created previously. Work out what it is you need to get your minimum viable product out there. And that would be my advice, really, on that one. Yeah.
Cool, perfect. Next question. Is there any test tooling around Terraform? And can you confirm you get a correct deployment prior to deploying?
Yes, there is testing. So we're currently in the process of trying to explore TerraTest, which is a tool that's out there on GitHub. I can't remember the provider or who's written it, but it basically uses Go's internal testing, because the Terraform tool's written in Go. So it's like Go tests on top of the Terraform, and it specifically runs the init, the apply, and the plan, and then ultimately the destroy. And based on the back of that, it will go and get the outputs that Terraform produces, and you can unit test against that. The caveat being that it will actually go and build that infrastructure and destroy that infrastructure. It's not something that we're currently using at FOOTASYLUM, but we're always keen to try and find out what is available to improve that testing around Terraform. It's it's notoriously difficult for us at the moment. As far as releasing the tests go, we try to work in the pattern of write the code, put it into the environment, and then promote that artifact from dev to test to prod or whatever it is that we're doing at the time. So our tests at the moment are roughly, has it been deployed into dev and have we broken anything in dev? Which I guess is riding by the edge of your seat, so to speak. But yeah, there are things available. Just currently haven't got the expertise to say definitively what you should be using.
Cool. What was it called? Sorry, Terra Test.
Terra Test, yeah. I can provide a link for that as well as part of the stuff that I'll stick in the slides.
Great. Thanks for that. Next question. How do you manage sensitive content in Terraform? Do you encrypt it or do you keep it somewhere else? Like kind of connection strings, I think, and things like that.
So we extensively use a lot of key vaults for our Azure stuff. So if we were going to get a connection string out of the back of an SQL database, we would configure that to become a secret in the key vault. As far as the secrets being held in the state file, we're following the principle of using blob storage in Azure. So the way that our build and deployment steps work, we'll run Azure CLI to create a storage account, blob storage, and that will become the remote backend for the state file. In between deployment and build steps, so to speak, we'll unlock the storage account and then we'll lock it back up no matter what the outcome is. So there are temporal moments where it's open and then it's closed again once we're satisfied that either it's built or it's not built. So that's currently how we're handling this sensitive information.
Cool. And the last question, how do you protect the state files that Terraform relies on? Do you have some form of backup process in the release pipeline?
Good question. I would have to say, no, we don't. They go into blob storage and they're held there, but they're locked and the access is kept away from everyone apart from the tool when it opens it up. So that's probably a worthwhile thing to go and investigate and figure out ourselves. So I'll get back to you on that one.
Cool. Cheers, Jonny. Thanks for that.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it.